Have you ever stopped to wonder why a material, say a battery or a piece of metal, doesn't just fail all at once? Why does it always seem to start in one tiny, invisible spot? Well, today we're going to dive into a technique that lets us see that exact chemistry happening right there on the surface. It's called Scanning Electrochemical Microscopy, or SECM for short. You see, here's the big secret about pretty much all materials, whether we're talking about metals, batteries, or even living cells. They are not uniform. Not at all. The most important chemical reactions, the ones that decide if something works or breaks down, they happen at these incredibly specific, tiny little spots on the surface. And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Why does failure always kick off in one specific place? The problem is our traditional methods just can't answer that. They measure the whole object at once, which, gives us an average reading, but that average completely glosses over these critical little hotspots of activity where the real action is happening. Okay, let me put it this way. Standard electrochemistry, it's like listening to an entire stadium roar during a game. You get the overall mood, sure, you get the average sound, but you have absolutely no idea what any single person is actually shouting. Local electrochemistry, what SEM does, is like walking into that crowd with a microphone and interviewing one person, then the next, then the next. That's how you get the details, the nuance, the real story. So, how in the world do we conduct this chemical interview? Well, we need a very specialized tool. We need a chemical detective. And for us, that detective is scanning electrochemical microscopy. It's this incredible technique that uses a tiny, tiny probe to get right up close and personal with a surface to reveal all its chemical secrets. Now, at the very heart of this detective work is something called the ultramicroelectrode, or UME. And just like the name suggests, it's an incredibly small electrode. We're talking a tip that's often less than 25 microns across. This tiny size is the whole key because it gives us a really high ratio of the insulating part to the active electrode part, what scientists call the R/G ratio. And that ratio is the secret to getting these beautiful, high-resolution chemical maps. And believe me, when we say tiny, we really mean it. This right here is an actual microscope image of a UME tip. To give you some perspective, that little tip you're looking at is more than 100 times smaller than the head of a ping. It's this microscopic scale that lets us zoom right in on the action. Okay, so before our detective can interrogate the surface, it needs a baseline. When the UME tip is way far away from everything, it measures this constant, steady electrical current. It's called the diffusion-limited steady-state current, or IT infinity. But really, you can just think of it as a dial tone. It's the normal, predictable signal you get before anything interesting happens. Every measurement we take from here on out gets compared back to this baseline. All right, so our detective doesn't just ask one simple question. Nope, it has several different modes of interrogation it can use to probe the surface and figure out exactly what it's doing chemically. Let's walk through the most common ones. By far, the most popular technique is called feedback mode. Here's the basic idea. We add a special molecule called a redox mediator into the solution. The UME tip then acts kind of like a transmitter. It sends out a chemical signal by reacting with that mediator, and then it just listens to see how the surface right below it responds. And this is just a brilliant illustration of the two things that can happen. So, if the tip is hanging out over an insulating surface, that surface is basically a wall. It physically blocks the mediator from getting back to the tip, and so the current drops. We call that negative feedback. But if the surface is conductive, something amazing happens. It recycles the mediator right back to the tip. Think of it like a chemical high five. This sets up a super fast cycle, and the current goes up. That's positive feedback. So here's the crucial takeaway. In feedback mode, the tip is the active player. It's sending out a signal to just the surface. But there's this other really powerful method called generation/collection mode, where the roles completely flip. In this case, the tip becomes a passive listener, and its whole job is to catch a new chemical signal that's being actively created by the surface itself. The most common version of this is called substrate generation/tip collection, or SG/TC. And here, the surface is the absolute star of the show. It's naturally making some kind of chemical. Maybe it's hydrogen gas bubbling off a corroding piece of metal, or maybe it's a neurotransmitter being released from a living cell. The UME tip just hovers above, acting like this super sensitive net, catching and measuring whatever that surface is putting out. So we have these signals, right? Currents that go up, currents that go down. But how do we turn all that raw data into something we can actually understand? into a clear picture. Well, that's the next step, cracking the code and turning these signals into an image. The most fundamental piece of data you can get in SECM is what's called the approach curve. It's simply a plot of how the current changes as that UME tip gets closer and closer to the surface. It's so important that people in the field basically call it the DNA of the experiment. It contains all the core information you need about what that surface is. This table really boils that experimental DNA down to a simple set of rules. For feedback mode, it's pretty straightforward. Current goes down over an insulator, current goes up over a conductor. It's this simple, binary yes or no answer that becomes the fundamental building block for the maps we're about to make. Now, an approach curve is great, but it only tells us about one single spot. And we want to see the whole landscape, right? To do that, we need to level up from a single point measurement to a full-blown chemical map. And the process itself is actually pretty elegant. First, the UME tip is brought really close to the surface. Then, a super precise positioning system moves the tip back and forth in a grid, almost like an old dot matrix printer. At every single pixel in that grid, the current is measured. And finally, a computer takes all of that data and converts it into a color-coded, high-resolution image of all the chemical activity. And here it is. This is the payoff. This is an actual SEM map. Each color you see represents a different level of electrical current, which in turn tells us about a different level of chemical reactivity. We are literally looking at a map of invisible chemistry, and it's revealing these hotspots of activity that you could never, ever see with your own eyes. Now, this isn't just some cool lab trick. This ability to map surface chemistry is completely transforming how we design and understand materials in just about every field of science and engineering you can think of. Take corrosion, for example. With SCCM, we can basically fly over a piece of metal and pinpoint the exact microscopic sites where failure is starting. What you're looking at in this diagram is a UME tip being used in SG/TC mode to find the exact spot where hydrogen gas is bubbling off a magnesium alloy. Finding these specific spots helps scientists finally understand why corrosion starts, and that lets them design way stronger, more resistant materials. Or how about biology? This is just incredible. Scientists are now using CSCM to listen to the chemical whispers of a single living cell. I mean, look at the diagram. You can see the UME tip parked right above a cell, and it's detecting nitric oxide, a vital signaling molecule, as the cell releases it in real time. This is opening up a whole new window into the fundamental chemistry of life itself. It's amazing. And for clean energy, SECM is an absolute game changer. You see, an electrode inside a battery or a fuel cell, it's not perfect. Some of the catalyst particles on it are superstars, doing all the heavy lifting, while others are basically duds. Well, SECM can map that whole electrode surface, identify those superstar particles, and help engineers design much more efficient energy devices. So, at the end of the day, SEM gives us a kind of superpower, the ability to see and map the invisible chemical reactions that are happening all around us, from a battery failing to our own cells communicating. And it leaves us with this really fascinating question. If we can map the chemistry of literally any surface, what critical secrets are we going to uncover next?